I still remember the sound of the shovel hitting the dirt. It was the last promise I ever made to my wife. And I kept it for 12 years without telling a single soul. The cruelest part? My own son spent those years believing I had become a weak old man with nothing left to lose. My name is Walter. I am 68 years old, and I have lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland, Oregon, for more than 3 decades. I spent 40 years repairing city buses before I retired. My hands are rough, my back hurts every morning, and I move slower than I used to. But age teaches you something strength never can. It teaches you when silence is more powerful than an argument. My wife Linda passed away after a long fight with cancer. During her final week, she reached for my hand with what little strength she had left. "Walt," she whispered, "promise me something." "Anything. Some things protect people better when they're hidden." I nodded without asking another question. She gave me a small metal box with tears in her eyes. "Keep this safe. Don't let anyone open it until you know it's time." That night after she was gone, I carried the box into our backyard. Under the old maple tree where we used to drink coffee together, I buried it exactly where she asked. I never looked inside, not once. People called me foolish. Maybe they were right. After Linda died, everything changed. Our son Eric visited less often. At first, he blamed work, then traffic. Then his children were too busy. Months became years. Sometimes I would go weeks without hearing his voice. Still, every birthday, every Christmas, I mailed gifts to my grandchildren. Sometimes they thanked me. Sometimes I wasn't even sure they received them. One Sunday afternoon, Eric finally showed up. He walked through my front door without knocking. He looked around the house like a real estate agent inspecting a property. "You still living here alone?" he asked. "I've managed so far." He forced a smile. "You know, this place is way too big for you now." I poured 2 cups of coffee. "I like the space." He didn't touch his cup. "You should think about moving into assisted living." I laughed quietly. "I can still cook, clean, and mow the lawn." "That's not the point." His voice had changed. It sounded less like concern and more like calculation. "You don't need all this anymore." I looked around the room Linda had decorated herself. Every picture on the wall carried a memory. Every scratch on the hardwood floor reminded me of our children running through the house. "This isn't just a house," I said softly. "It'll be mine someday anyway," Eric answered before he could stop himself. The room went completely silent. He quickly looked away. "I didn't mean it like that." But he did. A father knows when his child is telling the truth. A week later, my neighbor, Mrs. Jensen, knocked on my door carrying a pie. "Walter," she said carefully, "I hope you don't mind me saying something." "Go ahead." "I overheard Eric talking while he was outside." I frowned. "He was showing someone your backyard." "My backyard?" "He said once you're out of the picture, he'd tear everything down and build something modern." I stared through the kitchen window toward the old maple tree. The tree Linda loved, the place where my promise rested beneath the earth. That night, sleep never came. For the first time in 12 years, I stood outside with a flashlight staring at the maple tree. The soil looked untouched, but something felt wrong. The next morning, I noticed fresh footprints near the trunk. Someone had been digging. And just as I stepped closer, I saw a shovel leaning against the fence that I knew had never belonged to me. I picked up the shovel with shaking hands. The metal was clean except for damp soil near the blade. Whoever had used it hadn't finished what they started. I searched the yard carefully, but there was no one around. My neighbor, Mrs. Jensen, stepped onto her porch. "Walter, are you all right? I think someone was in my yard last night." She looked toward the maple tree. "I saw headlights around midnight." "I thought it was one of your relatives." My stomach tightened. Eric had a spare key years ago. I had never asked for it back. That afternoon, I quietly changed every lock in the house. 2 days later, Eric called. "Dad, why didn't my key work?" "I replaced the locks." "Without telling me?" "I didn't realize I needed permission." There was a long silence. "You've been acting strange." "I could say the same about you." He ended the call without another word. The following weekend, he arrived with his wife, Melissa. She smiled, but it looked forced. They sat at my kitchen table while I served iced tea. Melissa cleared her throat. "Walter, we've been talking." "About what?" "Your future." I almost smiled. My future seems to be a popular topic lately. Eric leaned forward. "Look, Dad, the market is hot. If you sell this house now, You'll get a great price. You can move into a nice retirement community. It'll be easier for everyone. For everyone? You know what I mean. No, I answered calmly. I don't. He sighed. We're trying to help. Help me. Or help yourselves? His face hardened. You always think the worst of me. I wasn't the one measuring my own father's backyard. Both of them froze. Melissa slowly looked toward Eric. You told him? I didn't. Mrs. Jensen's words had found their target. Eric stood up so quickly that his chair scraped across the floor. Fine. Yes, I looked around the property. So what? Someday it's going to be mine. I looked him straight in the eye. You've started counting your inheritance before I finished living. He grabbed his car keys. This conversation is pointless. As they drove away, Melissa glanced back through the passenger window. Unlike Eric, her face carried guilt instead of anger. 3 evenings later, someone knocked on my door after dark. It was Melissa, alone. I can't stay long, she whispered. What happened? She looked over her shoulder before speaking. Eric hired a contractor. For what? He's already drawing plans for this property. I felt my heart beat slow instead of racing. He really believes you'll sell. She shook her head. No. Her eyes filled with tears. He thinks there's something valuable buried in your backyard. Every muscle in my body went still. What makes him think that? I overheard him talking on the phone. He said he saw Mom give you a metal box the night before she died. He remembers watching from the upstairs window. I hadn't known anyone saw us. Melissa lowered her voice even more. He's planning to dig up the yard while you're away at your doctor's. Appointment on Tuesday. I thanked her for telling me. She reached for the doorknob, then stopped. Walter. Yes? If Eric finds that box, I don't think he'll ever forgive himself for what he's become. She walked into the night before I could answer. I closed the door, looked toward the maple tree, and realized that after 12 years, the promise I had protected in silence was about to be tested in a way I never imagined. Tuesday morning arrived with gray skies and steady rain. I left the house at the usual time for my doctor's appointment. But I never drove to the clinic. Instead, I parked 2 blocks away and quietly walked back through the neighborhood. Before leaving, I had asked Mrs. Jensen to keep an eye on my backyard. She promised to call if anyone came near the old maple tree. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Walter, she whispered. He's digging. I hurried toward the house and stopped behind the fence. Eric stood beneath the maple tree with 2 workers and a rented digging machine. He pointed at the ground with complete confidence. Right there, he said. Keep digging. The machine struck something hard. One worker lifted a small metal box from the soil and handed it to Eric. He quickly paid the workers and told them their job was finished. As soon as their truck disappeared, he dropped to his knees and forced open the rusty lid. His face changed instantly. There was no money. No gold, no property deed. Inside were several letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, an old photograph of Linda and me, and a sealed envelope with his name written on it in his mother's handwriting. I stepped into the yard. Did you find what you expected? Eric jumped and slowly turned around. Dad, I can explain. You don't have to. Read the letter. His hand shook as he opened the envelope. As he read, tears slowly filled his eyes. Eric, if you're reading this, your father has kept his promise. Years ago, he was offered the opportunity of a lifetime. The promotion would have doubled his salary, but it also meant moving across the country. He knew you were finally happy after a difficult childhood, and he refused to take you away from your friends. He chose your future over his own dreams. He never wanted praise or thanks. He only wanted you to grow up knowing you were loved. If you ever wonder what real wealth looks like, don't search for buried treasure. Look at the quiet sacrifices your father made every single day. Eric lowered the letter and stared at me. I thought you never wanted more. I smiled sadly. I wanted more time with my family. Everything else could wait. He covered his face and began crying harder than I had ever seen. I'm sorry, Dad. I stopped seeing you as my father. I only saw this house. I rested my hand on his shoulder. A person can lose their way. What matters is finding the courage to come back. Together we placed every letter back into the metal box. Eric carried it with both hands as we buried it beneath the maple tree once again. This time he understood that it had never protected money. It had protected a promise, a lifetime of love, and the truth his mother believed he would one day be ready to hear. From that day forward, Eric visited every Saturday. We repaired the porch, shared coffee in the mornings, and laughed as my grandchildren played beneath the old maple tree. One evening, my grandson asked why that tree mattered so much. Before I could answer, Eric smiled. Because this is where I learned the greatest inheritance isn't a house or money. It's the quiet sacrifices made by someone who loved us more than himself. As I watched my family together, I realized my wife's greatest secret had never been buried beneath that tree. It had been growing in our hearts all along, waiting for the day my son was finally ready to understand its true value.